Good morning, y'all. We have finally overcome the technical difficulties to bring you part two of my story. But before we dive into, my first aha moment that I told you about in the last video, I wanted to dive a little deeper into, why I really went into medicine and specifically ER to begin with, because I think it plays a large role in part of my story. And so, when I went into medicine, everyone says, they want to go into medicine to help people. I mean, I really did go into medicine to help people. I felt like I could really make a tangible and really important impact on someone's life when they really needed it in medicine and especially in ER. But one thing that really attracted me to ER was the fact that I could help, anyone who had the most amount of resources or even the lowest amount of resources or none at all. And I didn't have to think about that or factor that into my decision of whether or not, I could see them or have an appointment with them or any of those things. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of ER. So knowing that, we'll dive into, COVID and that first aha moment. So I can still remember the first time, I heard about COVID. I think I was at work and they were talking about, this new disease in China and everyone's like, yeah, it's just going to probably stay overseas. And then I remember it spread to Europe. And 1 month before the world shut down in the US, I remember I went with a friend from the ER to Spain. And I actually got sick on that trip and got really concerned that maybe I had COVID myself. Knowing what I know now, that was definitely not COVID compared to when I had it later. But it was definitely an interesting time. And so then I come back, and a month later, the world is shut down. And so, that was a super weird time. I think any of my fellow healthcare professionals can probably relate. The ERs were eerily empty, and it was where are all the sick people? They don't just stop getting sick, but everyone's just afraid to come. The roads were empty, everything was shut down, and then they start breaking out all this personal protective equipment that looks like hazmat suits, and you're like, oh crap, well, this is real. And then you start to think about what happens if I get sick? And then you start to see, your friends, your coworkers, your family members getting sick, and that was when I think things started really getting tough. There was just really not a whole lot we could do, and not a whole lot we could do to protect ourselves either. And I still remember another situation that I dealt with one of our ER registration clerks. I was on shift and they called me up front because she had a history of asthma and she was having some shortness of breath, and they thought she's having an asthma attack. So we went up there, we took her up there a pulse oximeter to check her oxygen levels, and I remember she was hypoxic or had a low oxygen level. And so we bring her back right away and we're like, yeah, you're not working anymore. And we diagnosed her with COVID, and before she even made it upstairs, she was intubated on a ventilator. And then a few days later, she actually passed away. And so that was obviously really tough on all of us. We're just in the ER, we're just, I don't know what to say, tuned to, you just work. Even when you're sick, it doesn't really matter, because if you don't work, you don't get paid. And that's all there is to it. But also, it's just the work ethic there, right? But that's when it became really difficult, because I remember I was the first person also in my group to get sick with COVID. And I remember I think I worked the first 2 days with a fever, just because that's what you do. You just push through. And it wasn't really something you always had to be worried about before. I remember I finally got diagnosed with COVID, and that was back in the days of the 14-day quarantine. And so, it's those 14 days, no shifts, no pay. There was no hazard leave, there's no paid sick leave in our profession. And it should have been a hint for me later, coming down to my unpaid maternity leave that I just went through as well, which why is that still a thing? But it just started to make it feel like is the sacrifice worth it? You're putting your body, your mind, your mental health on the line, and you start to realize how at risk you truly are, and is it worth my life, right? And so I think that was also a time when corporate greed started to really show during medicine. They didn't really as you probably saw on the news, like didn't necessarily take the best care of us during those times. And even when they could have, sometimes they couldn't. And that, I acknowledge that, but a lot of times they could have done better. They actually, they didn't, like I said, no hazard leave. They actually cut our hours during COVID. And so there was a lot going on there. I won't dive down the rabbit hole of corporate greed and private equity and all those things, because that's a deep rabbit hole right now. But it just makes you start to wonder, like, is it worth it? And I think that was my first aha moment when I knew I needed to start working on my exit strategy. So part 3 is going to dive into exactly that second moment when I started making the change and what I'm doing now. So stay tuned. And all right, guys, you know what to do. Drop a 3 in the comments below if you're ready to hear about part 3. And I'll make sure I'm on time this time, y'all. See you soon.